For weeks now, the headlines have been dominated by corporate America bowing to pressure, networks pulling talent under the heat of political scrutiny, and CEOs keeping a low profile as Washington descends into a circus. We've seen late-night hosts suspended, mergers mysteriously slowed, and boardrooms going silent at exactly the moment democracy needed voices the most. The story has been building like static before a storm. Everyone knew something was about to break.
Democracy. And right now we are dealing with, as I called him at my speech on the ellipse, a tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump.
And then it did. Sitting across from Rachel Maddow, Kamala Harris threw away the polite language and went straight for the jugular. In one interview, she lit up two of the country's biggest power centers, politics and corporate America. That's the battlefield, and that's where today's story begins. Let's get into it. Let's get straight to it. Kamala Harris didn't come to play nice. She went on MSNBC, sat across from Rachel Maddow, and called Donald J. Trump a tyrant. Not an opportunist, not a bully, a tyrant. And those words matter, because when a sitting vice president uses language like that, it's not casual. It's a line in the sand.
And these titans of industry are not speaking up. And perhaps it is because his threats and the way he has used the weight of the federal government to take out vengeance on his critics is something that they fear, and I get that. I understand why they do. We've seen the demonstration of it. Perhaps it is because they want to please him and nominate him for a Nobel Prize. Perhaps it's because they want a merger approved or they want to avoid an investigation. But at some point, they've got to stand up for the sake of the people who rely on all of these institutions to have integrity and to, at some point, be the guardrails against a tyrant who is using the federal government to execute his whim and fancy because of part of what I write about. This stuff is decades in the making, Rachel. It didn't just happen overnight. So much of what has indeed overwhelmed people, not to mention just scared the stuff out of people, is what we are witnessing is a high-velocity event.
Yeah.
We are witnessing something that has been happening so rapidly, and it feels chaotic. But what I would offer you is what we are witnessing is the swift implementation of a plan that was decades in the making. Decades in the making. Project 2025 didn't just drop out of thin air. That's a product of decades of work. Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation. Understand that the implementation of a plan that's about trying to get rid of the Department of Education, deregulate industries, weaken the rule of law by over a period of time, creating a system and through gerrymandering states so that we would now have the Supreme Court that we have. This stuff didn't happen overnight, and it did not happen just because of an election in 2024 or even 20.
Now let's pause here. The Vice President of the United States is literally comparing Trump to authoritarian rulers, the kind of leaders who bend laws to silence critics, weaponize government power, and punish dissent. And if you think she's exaggerating, just look at his track record. Demanding loyalty oaths, threatening media companies, and floating the idea of using federal agencies as political weapons. That's not democracy. That's strongman playbook 101. The kind of thing we used to condemn in other countries, but now it's right here at home. But Harris didn't stop at Trump. Oh no, she brought receipts for America's so-called titans of industry. And her message? You're feckless. You're silent. You've got billion-dollar balance sheets and billion-dollar PR firms, but when democracy needed you to stand up, you folded like paper.
No, I am a lifelong public servant, and but I've worked closely with the private sector over many years. And I always believed that if push came to shove, those titans of industry would be guardrails for our democracy, for the importance of sustaining democratic institutions. And one by one by one, they have been silent. They have been, you know, yes, I use the word feckless. It's not like they're going to lose their yacht or their house in the Hamptons. And here's the thing. Democracy sustains capitalism. Capitalism thrives in a democracy. And right now we are dealing with, as I called him at my speech on the ellipse, a tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now.
She's saying the people who run America's boardrooms, the ones who like to call themselves innovators, visionaries, disruptors, suddenly lose their voices when power starts leaning on them. Where was the moral courage when networks were bullied? Where was the outrage when media hosts were yanked off air for offending the wrong people? Harris isn't just calling them cautious, she's calling them complicit. And the word she used is brutal. Feckless. Not weak, not timid, feckless. It means you had the power and you squandered it. So why do CEOs stay quiet? Harris spells it out. Fear. Fear that if you speak, their mergers won't be approved. Fear that if they push back, their companies will be targeted. This is not hypothetical. Trump has already threatened to use the FTC and FCC to go after media companies he doesn't like.
They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. And we can get into some ways that we've been trying to reinvigorate the public interest and some changes that we've seen. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, you know, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. Obviously, look, there's calls for Kimmel to be fired. I think, you know, you could certainly see a path forward for suspension over this. And again, you know, the FCC is going to have remedies that we could look at. And again, you know, we may ultimately be called to be a judge on that. But yes, this also strikes me as sort of conduct that to some extent shows some sort of desperate irrelevance.
Also, let's not forget he floated tariffs as punishment for criticism. He bragged about using the DOJ as his personal law firm. MSNBC has proved it. No, actually, Trump himself proved it. So Harris is just saying the CEOs know this and they're already surrendering. Think about how insane that is. The most powerful executives in America, people who oversee trillions of dollars, are acting like nervous interns worried about upsetting the boss they don't even have yet. These aren't victims, they're collaborators. And the scary part, capitulation doesn't just happen once. It has become a habit. You give an inch, the tyrant takes a mile. And by the time you realize it, you're not protecting your company anymore, you're running errands for an autocrat.
So here's some examples of things you cannot say about your political opponents.
You can't call someone who you disagree with a fascist.
Leaders cannot call their political opponents Nazis and fascists and enemies of the state.
How horrible and dangerous it is to view people with whom we disagree as somehow being less than human.
Thank you. You can't say fascist. You can't say enemy of the state. You can't say less than human. These are simple rules that any responsible member of a society can easily follow.
The Democrats, they're fascists. Joe Biden, he's an enemy of the state. It's a very demonic party. Nancy Pelosi said, please don't call them animals, they're human beings. I said, no, they're animals. Of course, I think she's an animal too, you want to know the truth.
Technically correct. not a mineral.
And they say, we don't need him, freedom, freedom. He's a dictator, he's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. I'm a man with great common sense and I'm a smart person.
Americans like dictators. Well, that's new. So let's add this up. Harris calls Trump a tyrant. She calls CEOs cowards. And she ties it all to the survival of both democracy and capitalism. That's not a campaign soundbite. That's an alarm bell. She's saying the country is at a tipping point, and silence isn't neutral. Silence is complicity.
I also talk about, the first 2 weeks that I was the top of the ticket, we had no polling, because no polling had been done on me. So it was my gut.
Yeah.
And so I came up with this speech that actually was about, I was a prosecutor. I dealt with people who engaged in sexual abuse. I was attorney general. I took on people who engaged in fraud, on and on and on. And so I know his type.
I remember this line, yeah.
And because there is, there's something about in the English language that phrase, I know his type, that does a lot of work for you. Because it's something we all relate to, whether it was that boss, it was that person, whatever. I know his type. And so the character that I knew I was running against is someone, because he has shown it also. I mean, he did it with President Obama. He did it with Secretary Clinton. He throws this stuff out that he thinks will be an individual's weakness or Achilles heel, with the intent to distract from the fact that, as it was in this campaign, he had no plan for actually bringing down costs and prices for the American people. He had very few plans for what he would actually do that was about the American people and not about an execution of his vengeance on his enemies. And I wasn't about to fall for that bait. And the stakes were too high. The stakes were too high. You can't get in the gutter with that guy, because that is the way that he distracts from the fact that, for example, right now, he promised the people who voted for him that on day one he'd bring down prices. And I do believe, Rachel, that's one of the main reasons that the people who voted for him elected him, because they believed he would do it. He lied. We're now in a position where unemployment is up, inflation is up, the cost of groceries is up. So, as the folks used to say, don't fall for the okie doke. Just don't.
Now here's the kicker. If Harris is wrong, then what's the worst that happens? Some tough talk on late night TV? But if she's right, then America is sleepwalking into authoritarianism, while the very people with the power to stop it, the CEOs, the billionaires, the titans of industry, are too busy counting profits to notice the walls closing in. And when those walls close, it won't matter how much money you've got. Tyranny doesn't take cash, it takes everything. So the question is, will the people with power finally wake up? Or will history look back at this moment and say Harris told us exactly what was happening and we ignored her until it was too late? Let us know in the comment section. What do you think should be done?